Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. As some of you know, I have done presentations at UCI live when I was literally about 2 miles away. Now I'm on the other side of the country. We're back where my wife and I are from originally. But it's always a pleasure to be back especially with this program. And so I'm doing this long distance, but with the same enthusiasm as if I were in the room, although I will miss the person-to-person interaction. And I think we'll be able to do that with what the presentation Besart is going to do as well. Now, when I went in to do this presentation, a thought, by the way, that I just had as I was sitting here is that why wouldn't a person with an engineering or science background go into regulatory affairs? I mean, when I was graduating, I had never heard of the field, and I sort of fell into it just through a progression of my career. So I started out in the food business. I was hired by a couple of guys I met at a symposium from FDA. They said, "Have you ever considered coming to Washington to work?" And I went into an engineering group, went through 3 jobs there, and then was hired away by J&J and spent a total of 10 years there. It all just fell into place. But what I want to tell you is that if you're in science, well, in fact, you could be in arts, science, business, and engineering, there is an opportunity. So when PowerPoint offered this as a template, I thought, boy, that's pretty busy. But then it sort of models what it's like to be in a career in regulatory affairs. And let's get started with showing some of those interactions. RA is at the heart of the business. Now, the groups that we deal with primarily are clinical research, research and development for the design and development of new products, sales and marketing. They're more interested in the claims they're going to be able to make with new products and advertising, promotion. And then on the manufacturing floor, we're gathering information to send to these regulatory authorities around the world on getting our products approved. But we're also working with these other groups as well, and I'll run through that. Quality assurance, of course, is a very close partner, especially on matters of inspections, for example, or a product recall from the field. So let's say I walk in, I say, "Hi, I'm in our regulatory affairs. Here's what I'm doing." Maybe I'm preparing a submission for approval of a new product. Now, these can be very complex. They can be binders of information of a clinical study report study that went on for years. It might be a detailed pharmaceutical manufacturing product process all the way from how the components are handled upon receipt, how they're processed, all the way through packaging and labeling, maybe sterilization, aseptic filling. I might be working with clinical research, showing them how they can position their clinical study data the best way for FDA review so it's clear and compelling. Or I might be writing a response where FDA has come in for an audit, or it could be a Chinese delegation, it could be a European notified body, and I'm writing responses to what they have found to put them in the context of the regulations. Maybe I'm looking at the first draft of a research and development report to FDA on validation of a new product. I want to make sure that report is tight, that it's clear, that it doesn't have errors, and it's something that's going to help us get the product approved quickly and ahead of our competition. I might be on the manufacturing floor so that I can gather information about the product, how it's made, and gather the information where they can help me put together the manufacturing section. This is especially important in some of the more critical devices and pharmaceuticals. It goes into a special section on manufacturing. Now, I'm also working with finance. It might be that I'm setting the budget for the next year. It might be that we have to reduce expenses. So the regulatory affairs group is looking at what we could give up and not adversely affect getting products to market, because often regulatory is a small group of highly specialized people. Now, the other thing I might want to do is I might have been asked by the mergers and acquisitions group to go look at a company. And I can remember doing one of these, my goodness, now it's 20, 30 years ago, where I went to Israel. We were looking at J&J of acquiring a company there that had a very novel sensing technology where you could map a catheter going into the heart that would move around to destroy or ablate, do an ablation of a node that was causing an arrhythmia in the heart. And so I went there with a team of other specialists from other areas, and we looked at the filings to make sure that they were something that if we were audited later on, they would hold up. and we did wind up acquiring the company. And I might meet with sales and marketing to say, we know this product is going to be coming to market. We know what the doctors claim it will do for the patients and for the doctors who use it and what it can do for the company. But let's talk about what claims you want and how you want to promote it, because that's going to drive our regulatory strategy. So I'd like to mention something here that I see as the regulatory affairs professionals' pillars of strength. But you could go into aerospace, you could go into a different type of manufacturing, maybe AI software development. These things will define you and your brand. And many of my first jobs, I never applied for the job. My first job came, I was volunteering at a race course, as on a safety team, analyzing accidents on motor racing. And my boss said, how would you like to come and work for me? And this was the way it happened. So you'll want to come out of your education with a brand that when you're in the workplace, people notice you and they say, this is a person I want on my team. So integrity, never a question about your strategies, your work products, your working relationships, always strong in integrity. You're competent in demonstrating superior knowledge and understanding of the products and regulatory affairs. So this is where you can stand out. A lot of times in a company, you'll see the marketing people might be the superstars, or the salespeople that get the big numbers, maybe R&D people who have developed a brand new product. Regulatory can be superstars, getting our products approved faster than the competition, and being subject matter experts who can be in a position to defend the company if the product is questioned. Dependability. After I got out of grad school, my first job in product development, there was a fellow named Larry Root. He was dependable. He was cheerful. If I needed something done, he got the work done with high quality, on time, consistently met objectives. And it meant that much to me that I still remember his name. He was a great person to work with. Reliability. This is about consistency of the work, meeting requirements, and always on time. Teamwork. Merle Luminarius, a quality manager who worked for me several years ago, said, with teamwork together, everyone achieves more. So I look at 5 C's, and this could be if I'm going to go to a doctor's appointment and he's going to look at something, what am I looking at in this? What am I looking for in a coworker, in someone I trust? One is competence. Another is confidence. If you're delivering a message, and Besart can relate to this because when I was at FDA, I was involved in inspections. I would go out as an expert, a closer, as an engineer. And if I was delivering non-conformances and saying there was something that was wrong that needed to be fixed, it had to be done with confidence and conviction. And then good communication skills are vitally important so that you can work effectively in a team and be collegial. Someone your coworkers like to work with, someone who your major professor likes to work with, your boss, someone who's seen as a team player. Now, the other misconception about regulatory affairs is, it's all about laws, rules, regulations. How boring. Absolutely not. We have to know it, and that distinguishes us where we understand the rules that pertain to our business, pharmaceuticals, biologics, or medical devices. But you're also deriving strategies that get you to market before your competitors, and thereby making RA a key contributor to business success. A seat at the grown-up table. If you're on a new product development team, even as an entry-level regulatory affairs person, you're still bringing that engineering science expertise to the table. You're not simply overhead, like just a requirement of regulatory agencies. The other thing is building a reputation. In one respect, it's within and outside the company for obtaining product approvals worldwide and with the broadest indications for use and favorable marketing claims to give a sustainable competitive advantage. And besides that reputation, it's also among those regulators so that the people that review the products trust you, respect the quality of your data, and help you understand what is needed for first pass approval. Sort of the golden egg is to try to get approval first pass or with very few questions. And the part I loved, of course, was building a diverse, high-powered regulatory team with a blend of different specialties that consistently delivered a competitive advantage to the organization. Other things, I had to develop an understanding, as my people did, of countries' cultures. There, through interactions with regulators, people in different countries behave differently. They have different expectations of things like professionalism, politeness, quality of data. And so, through these meetings with regulators, travel to foreign countries to expedite approval, it's a remarkable experience and something that I will never forget. I don't think my people will either. And then being an expert on interpreting laws and regulations so you can explain to business partners not only the literal meaning of a regulation, which could be sort of boring, but there's always a preamble. For a 3-page regulation, there could be a 20-page preamble that tells why FDA decided it was important to have these requirements. And that is all gleaned from experience and reading these preambles. Now, in some cases, we use Kaizen principles of continuous improvement on regulatory processes and procedures, working with clinical research and R&D to develop the fastest, the leanest path from product concept to approval. So Kaizen isn't just for the production floor, or implementing early upstream RA review of R&D clinical manufacturing draft reports to allow revision and, if necessary, additional testing at an early stage, because this is what could happen. The president would be all over R&D saying, get that product written up so that the regulatory group can send it to FDA. Sometimes they were in a hurry. Sometimes they cut corners. Sometimes they gave me something that I would take to the VP of R&D and say, you would never want me to suggest this, that we almost met the requirements of the specification. So what we started doing is we started looking at reports like that as soon as the first draft was done, so that when that report hit the regulatory affairs specialist desk, typically he or she had about 1 day to get it into final form because we were working upstream that much ahead. And so regulatory affairs is much more than just reading about regulations. Is it technical? Yes. Having a scientific, engineering, or technical background can provide a terrific advantage when serving on high-performing product development teams. And I think many of you might go into this, regardless of the industry you join. But that concept, even to the extent where we had cases where the members of the team would rate each other. So my regulatory affairs person was getting a rating not just from me, but also from members of the team that he or she served on, and also the boss of that team, the project leader. So it's a really exciting experience, and you're on the front line working with doctors on the newest concepts. And this background can lead to being a subject matter expert on the company and its products, which is important. For example, when submitting a product for regulatory approval, a technical background provides a key advantage when explaining the product to regulators, when training them, and then understanding the technical requirements of a country like maybe Japan that has very technical requirements, or India or China, and what their expectations are for technical design and performance features. And as you know, to get approval to sell a product in Europe, you have to have CE marking. We see CE marking on everything on our iPhones and elevators and everything that's pretty much a standards-driven device or equipment. And this is a very important aspect of the regulatory affairs professional, is getting that CE mark approval. Now, if a company gets a report at the end of an audit that there are some observations that have a technical nature, the engineer on the team, the subject matter expert, can dive in and help the company respond to any reported product malfunctions or failures. And some of these come in through the complaint system. So I was always having a quality engineer on a complaint management team, and regulatory affairs individuals also were very active in that regard. And it's not just about medical devices, because for pharmaceutical, diagnostic reagents, and biologics, a scientific or engineering background can be important in understanding process parameters like mixing times, heat cycles, formulation chemistry, and so on. So there's a role for engineers, chemists, biological majors, microbiologists. All of those roles exist within regulatory bodies like FDA, but also within companies. Now, there's a broad range of roles and responsibilities. So We talked about preparing and submitting applications to regulatory agencies worldwide, developing strategies that give a competitive advantage. Sometimes this is, what data, like with a pre-market approval application for a class 3 pharmaceutical that is very life-supporting, life-sustaining, critical, that it is safe and effective for use, you might be able to convince FDA that you could do a modular submission. So you think of strategies like that. We'll give them the organization structure. We'll give them the manufacturing section. All of this being done while R&D is finalizing R&D, or maybe the clinical study is wrapping up and they're writing their reports. So we accelerate our time to market. I mean, other things were, we might give FDA a little bit more information than they wanted, because that would create a higher bar for the fast follower that might want to copy our device. And then one of the things that's exciting too is meeting with regulatory officials, whether it's on site or in FDA or somewhere else in the world, to negotiate submission comment and what the optimal timelines are for approval. And you're trying to sell why your approach is one that's a safe path to approval. And then the other thing is working with these other groups like R&D, clinical research, and manufacturing to make sure that they're teaching them what is needed and why it's needed by reviewers so that it will meet agency reviewers' requirements and expectations. It's also participating in inspections and audits, as Besart is going through right now. You're there in the room and you're helping them assess to what used to be called good manufacturing practices are now called quality systems regulations, but how work gets done in a safe and effective manner in a plant. Serving as an expert resource when evaluating the regulatory status of acquisition targets. This is like when I went to Israel to look at a target, but it could be a place next door. And when I was working in Irvine, I just had to drive about 20 minutes across town to get to a company we were looking at for an acquisition that we ultimately acquired. But we needed to know that if we were going to buy the company and FDA later came in and questioned anything about the quality and integrity
Sorry, I'm
of the
having trouble
approval.
hearing you.
Are you speaking to me?
My Siri went off. I'm sorry.
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. Apologize to Siri for me. I might not do that personally. Yeah. So sorry. So sorry, Siri. Okay. So back to the story. So anyway, it's really being this expert resource to help the company work effectively with regulators. Also, we have to train people inside the organization out who are not in regulatory affairs on what matters when submitting to FDA. And one thing that I found useful, I served on national standards committees. I was co-chair of a couple committees, one on ethylene oxide sterilization and one on steam sterilization, both used primarily for medical devices, often used for medical devices. And I got noticed. There were people there from companies that ultimately hired me. I started when I was at FDA. I carried on when I was in industry. But getting that kind of exposure of where you're doing it, it could be volunteer efforts. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of going to meetings like OCRA to find out about the profession and also meet people who can have a significant impact on your career. So here are some memorable moments in my career. And this is whoa, I didn't see that coming. I joined a company as VP QARA, Quality Assurance Regulatory Affairs, and the staff said to me, we can't get any products approved by FDA. FDA hates us. And so I know that FDA doesn't hate a company, but so I talked to the lead FDA reviewer. At first, she didn't want to tell me what was wrong, but I said, look, I was at FDA. You can trust me. And she said, when I see grammatical and spelling errors in the submission, I assume that there are errors in the safety and effectiveness data as well. And that's the kiss of death. So here, based on all the things that the solution, by the way, was we tightened up our review process. I was even reviewing every page of a submission going to FDA until we got to a point where that was a standard that had to be met. And if a person couldn't meet that standard, they just weren't a really good fit for the organization. But this is something that clearly was a concern. once we built that trust with the reviewer, then we were able to get products approved as fast as anyone else, and maybe faster because we were working and coming from that improvement situation. What it's like on the night shift. Early in my career, literally about a year after joining FDA, so I wasn't out of grad school that long, maybe 3 or 4 years. And I went to Puerto Rico to do an inspection of a major pharmaceutical company. It's a company that if you were to name three big drug companies, probably be on that list. And the first week, another chemical engineer was there, a guy who had been, with the group probably for 20, 30, 40 years, a senior guy. We were only about 5 people in the group, and we went out into the field. I had a badge. We'd go out and be closers. I was also training industry. I was training in field district offices, but I also got to go out on inspections, sometimes alone, sometimes overseas. And it was a fantastic career. So after the first week, they left a list of observations on a form FDA 483. And the next week, it was just Ruben Ocasio and me, a fairly junior investigator. One night, both of us were thinking maybe we should go back to the facility and watch the night shift. And so that I didn't want to suggest it because I figured Ruben wanted to get home to his family. He figured some guy like me from headquarters could care less about going in, but we both wanted to go in and we did. And the things we saw on that night shift, especially in a clean room operation where maintenance staff were just walking in without the gowning procedures, putting on a mask, was remarkable. And when we delivered our 483 at the end of a week and found several other observations, talk about confidence and conviction in presenting, because it really, you couldn't hear a pin drop in the room, and people were really upset that we had found these things because they thought when the big shots left, the experts, this was going to be an easy path toward closing out the inspection. And this is another one that I alluded to, where an FDA reviewer said, or branch chief said to me, "You've got to be kidding. Everybody wants their products approved before the annual meeting of the American College of Cardiology." So when I heard that, I told the reviewer, I said, "Look, we'll give you everything you need. We'll get it to you in a timely manner with really good quality, but this would mean a lot to get this approved." And so, yes, we got our approval. Our competitor in the booth next to us did not. We had the balloons and posters, and the way we did it was this interaction, continual interaction with the reviewers. Maybe we drove them crazy, but we got what they needed and we got it to them. And then, just one final thing. Shortly after I was working in Pfizer. They spun off a company and I joined them. FDA sent their A team in for an inspection. They wanted to shut down the company because prior management, there was a defect with the device and they did not tell doctors. They did not tell FDA, and patients were still dying. They were still shipping the device because there was an inherent design structural flaw. And so they came in, and this is something Besart will relate to. Usually at the end of an inspection, you get a list of observations as 483, and there might be 5, 6, or 7, sometimes only on one page, handwritten. And in 45 minutes at the end of the inspection, you discuss them, you shake hands, and you say, "We'll see you next time." This inspection went on for 3 months. We didn't have a handwritten 483, it was typewritten, 33 pages. And what we did, we could see the way this was going. I was calling people that I knew at FDA in Washington. I said, "Hey, look, it's a totally different management team. We know what they're trying to do. It's not that bad." We had techniques set up that we could not miss anything. We worked to address, as we saw something in week 1 that we thought that could be an issue, we already established a corrective action. And at the end, we had a 1-day discussion, not a 1 hour. I had 2 people, a regulatory affairs person and a person from R&D, make presentations. And then we got our response to those 33 type page items, must have been 100 or more, within 2 weeks. And we worked till 2, 3 in the morning sometimes to make that impression that this was a different management team. But if you think regulatory affairs is boring, it's not. It can be really interesting, challenging, and in an environment where you're working on products that matter to doctors and their patients. So I'm not going to read these through, but I will just say that RAPS, the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, has a very detailed competency framework that regulatory affairs professionals use as a pathway to their training and their career development. It's not just about rules and regulations. It's about things like, if you look over here, leadership, business acumen, continuous improvement, product planning, marketing strategy, communication. In fact, two colleagues and I are doing, and we did one session last week, Friday, we're doing a 4-week program, 3 hours online every session on strategic communication. So that box you saw in the very beginning of senior management that we interact with, it's usually when there's either really good news or really bad news. And we're teaching on we give them scenarios on things gone wrong. And then we say, take this information, here's how to communicate it clearly, concisely, because you need to make a one-time favorable, concise presentation to senior management. So, oh, by the way, you'll be getting a PDF with all these slides. So you'll see all this stuff again if you want to look at it. So how to be seen as a key player, achieve consistent outcomes on major products. You want to send in submissions that don't trigger show-stopping surprises, questions from reviewers. That's a real bummer. You want product approvals that beat the competition. You want to prepare the organization, as I'm sure Besart did, for compliance inspections so that you achieve outcomes with no observations or very few nonconformities cited. You want to manage your staff. It could be that you're just a team leader. Maybe you're just one step over the entry level, or you could be the head of the whole organization, but you're managing the staff and the budget in a credible a manner that meets the expectations of senior management and is consistent with the whole organization's financial health. Unfortunately, regulatory affairs sometimes is seen as out of tune, and I just could not let that happen. And maybe it's because my scientific engineering background, we want to be hands-on. We can support mergers and acquisitions in a way that confidently allows senior management to set a value on the proposed action and have confidence, as we mentioned, in the quality and the integrity of the company's strategy and their products. And then working proactively with these other groups like R&D and clinical research to make sure that their department output meets the expectations and requirements of the approving regulatory bodies. So now, as I'm getting to close here, I want to share, my role sometimes was as a salesperson. I was selling to FDA, I was selling to notified bodies, I was selling to Japanese delegation. So I talked to some of the top sales reps that I knew. These were people that if they had a certain objective, a plan for 2025, they were at 135% of plan. So I said, what are your secrets? One person said, you need to be a resource to the customer. You need to, he said, the first 2 or 3 times I go into the account, I'm not trying to sell the product. I'm teaching them about the benefits, the clinical benefits, what it can do to their practice, expand the practice, be good for the hospital. So your customers, if you're in regulatory affairs, are regulatory bodies, whether you're seeking approval, hosting or inspection. It's important to train regulators, and that's where people with a scientific technical background can be a real asset to the company. Another salesperson, guy who would call his customers if he knew their kids were sick. He really cared about them. It was genuine. This was his character. He said, you need to love the customer. Now, when I've given talks and I've mentioned this, I said, you don't need to hug your regulatory reviewer, but you need to treat regulatory agencies the way you would want to be treated if you were in their position. They need valid and irrefutable evidence that your product is safe. So you need to respect that. Now, the other one was somebody who was outside of the medical products field. And I went to get my car serviced. It was in August. And I noticed one sales rep had been salesperson of the month for 7 months. And if you're doing the math, that means every month up until August. And he was probably going to be the salesperson of the month in August too. So I went over to talk to him in his cubicle, and he was on the phone with a customer saying how she liked the car. Was there anything she needed? So I said, look, I'm in a totally different business. What is your secret? He said, find out what the customers want and make it easy for them to get it. So we would go out of our way to ask exactly what reviewers wanted. Remember, they're reviewing hundreds of different devices. the device we're presenting or the pharmaceutical product might be different enough that it poses new safety and effectiveness questions. So we want to train them and make it easy for them to approve our product. So I was asked to give a few examples of regulatory affairs jargon. And I just will say a few words here about the tiers of, and I'll talk about FDA here, but it's pretty much common throughout the world. There are some products that are life-saving and life-supporting. And FDA, they're called Class 3 products. They could have new formulations, new technologies, new intended uses that affect safety and effectiveness. So whether it's a pharmaceutical where they need a new drug application or a medical device requiring a pre-market approval application, a PMA, these applications are much more intense. They require clinical trials, a lot of manufacturing details, a lot of R&D, design details, as well as verification and validation that products and processes consistently meet their requirements. And that's where, engineers, scientists are in on the ground floor. Now, there were a lot of medical devices on the market when FDA published these regulations many, many years ago. So what were they going to do with any devices that came along afterwards? If a company could prove that that device was substantially equivalent, they could submit what was called a 510(k) application, which happened to be the section of the regulation upon which it's based. And a 510(k) is just a procedure for the kind of information required to demonstrate substantial equivalence. So whereas a new drug application or PMA might take years for approval while all this information is reviewed and there are questions that go much more deeply than with a 510(k), a substantial equivalence 510(k) could be reviewed in 90 days. There might be an initial round of questions, requests for additional information, deficiency letter, as it's often called, but that can typically get the product to market much clearer. Now, you might say, well, in the 20 or 30 years since the reg was written, maybe actually quite a bit longer, there are new devices that aren't substantially equivalent, but they don't rise to the level of Class 3. And that's where there's de novo. For these new devices, if you can show that their safety profile is more like devices in the 510(k) Class 2 area, and that they don't pose these new considerations that would make them challenging, life-saving, life-supporting, then they can go to path by a different market. A couple other terms we use. We talked about quality system compliance, which is basically good manufacturing practices. The International Standards Organization, for years, it has ISO 1345, the Quality System Compliance Regulation. But now FDA's good manufacturing practices, quality system regulation is really harmonizing to where they're almost identical. And that will occur very quickly, if not maybe in this coming year. CE mark certification we touched on is where a notified body in Europe, a standards organization, will provide a CE mark upon review of data similar to what FDA would look like for medical devices, but again, applies to everything we see in everyday life. And then another thing that engineers, scientists get involved with routinely are things like failure mode and effects analysis, hazard analysis, and critical control points. With an FMEA, you're looking at every variable, like temperature controller. What if it fails? What's the mitigation? What's the level of criticality if there is a failure to the patient or to the doctor using the device? And what are we doing to mitigate it and maybe redesign? So a lot of tools in the toolbox. So finally, let's say it's day one on the job. What would I be doing? You might be working with a mentor who will help tailor your training and development to your career interests. Could be your boss, could be somebody in a different department. You might go and do a deep dive on the design of companies' products. This is something you'd want in your toolkit on the products, processes, and services, spending some time with engineers on the manufacturing floor or in the R&D lab. And then spending time in other departments, R&D, what testing do they do to demonstrate and ensure asset safety and effectiveness? Clinical research, what clinical trials are ongoing? Why are they designed the way they are? How do they respond to adverse events? How is the product made in manufacturing? What are the challenges? How are they addressed? What are the process controls? And then QA, QC, how does this group assure that the products released to customers consistently meet their requirements for safety and effectiveness? Again, this exciting opportunity to be on a high-performing cross-functional product development team as an RA team member, and then learning the principles of quality management systems so that when the regulatory inspections are conducted, you can understand the implications of adverse findings, how to respond to them, and how an organization prepares ahead of time for a successful outcome. So now, what can you do as a graduate scholar to prepare for a career in regulatory affairs that utilizes your primary areas of study at the university? You could look at an intern position at a pharmaceutical, diagnostics, or medical device company. And I think UC Irvine is particularly good at trying to find these opportunities with partner companies. And it's a real win for the company to have you there, and often it could lead to full-time employment. There might be classes that best position your education and training for a career in regulatory affairs that maximizes the application of your core knowledge and, of course, your core interests. You could look at a postdoc opportunity. I know that some UC Irvine students were getting hands-on experience working with maybe a university advisor partnering with personnel from a local company to actually develop innovative new products or software applications. Another thing is to attend meetings of the Orange County Regulatory Affairs Discussion Group, and Besart will be speaking to that, or other professional seminars. If there's a local meeting, for example, of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers or Society of Mechanical Engineers, to learn more and to meet people that could have an effect on your career. Talk to others in the university who have done internship, postdoc work, to see if any of that could be relevant to a regulatory affairs career, and even going on regulatory affairs websites. You know, working at FDA, whether it would be in the FDA district office in Irvine, maybe actually starting as an inspector, or investigator, they'd love to have engineers in those roles, especially because they can have an advanced pay grade and progress then into a career in a district and other districts. Unfortunately, right now, with the shutdown, and with all of the reorganization that's going on at FDA, sad to say, it's probably not one's first choice. So this is a wrap. So if you went into RNA, would you go in as an investigator, which is fun and challenging, maybe a scientist working on teams, maybe a clinical researcher? You might be on a team working on areas like risk management with your colleagues. And then if you were thinking of going into medical school, that doesn't preclude working in regulatory affairs, because you might be working in clinical research, but you might also have responsibility ultimately for regulatory affairs or being part of the regulatory organization as an MD. So at the bottom, you can see my LinkedIn information, the link and a QR code, and that is it. Wow. So I'm going to turn it over to Besart and also ask if you have any questions. And let me bring up the group again here. Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Richard. I don't have any questions personally, so I think that was a really great presentation.
Thank you. Okay, I'm anxious to hear what you've got to say, Besart. And I'm going to go on mute here.
Yeah. If you guys want, we could take like a quick 2-minute break. 2-minute session. Or you guys want bathroom breaks, anything like that? Not. I can go ahead.
Besart, I'm going to introduce you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Besart Islami is a regulatory affairs professional with a strong foundation in biology and over 8 years of experience in medical devices, cell and gene therapy, and quality compliance. He currently serves as a regulatory affairs specialist too at BioRed Laboratory in Irvine, California, where he ensures global compliance for in vitro diagnostic IVD products. Besart holds a BS in biology from Montclair State University and is pursuing a regulatory affairs compliance for medical devices certificate at University of California, Irvine. He also serves as a President-elect 2026-2028 for the Orange County Regulatory Affairs Discussion Group, OCRA. reflecting his leadership and commitment to advancing the regulatory community. Please join me in welcoming Besart Islami.
Advance, and I'm there.
Perfect. Yeah, you have the right screen. Thank you everybody for your patience. So as you guys know, my name is Besart. You guys can call me Bess, and I currently work at Biomed as a regulatory affairs specialist and located in Irvine, California. I also was just elected the next president for OCRA, which I'll be talking more about it towards the end of the presentation. And I am currently enrolled in a regulatory affairs certification program here at UCI. I am completing that program in this coming end of this month, and I'm looking forward to many other courses that they have to offer over here. We go with the next slide, Rich. Okay. So,
Okay. Okay.
what Rich mentioned about RA being the heart of business, and honestly, I couldn't agree anymore. When I look at a RA specialist or just the RA department, it's literally like it's the heart that like pumps blood into all these departments, and without RA, pretty much the whole organization is like pretty much dead, because for for a product to even exist, you need manufacturing, you need quality assurance, you need R&D. Without those team members and without us giving them that type of work and that compliance that is required, you cannot get your product approved in the market. And every new idea needs a regulatory and like a regulatory path to become to make that product into the market. And it doesn't happen on its own. It's guided by regulatory professionals at different types of levels. So if we look at the next slide, we can see what those roles are and how they can contribute. Okay, so what do our roles look like today? Depending what level you're at. So for an RA associate, that's more of an entry-level basis. This is where you typically deal with labeling, submissions, and documentation support. And then as you grow on within that field, you, as a specialist too, you get more leading projects and having more direct contact with agencies. And then at a strategic level, that's where pretty much you develop global strategy plans and have more of a leadership role. And right now, RA positions are in high demand. So with the experience of your technical, like your technical knowledge, with engineering background, it'll play a big advantage when you apply to these companies. But the title only tells part of the story. At the next slide, I'm going to tell you more about what makes the biggest difference, and that comes to more of your skills and your mindset. Next slide. So the skills that matter the most, the best RA professionals, they balance technical knowledge and people skill. Richard mentioned it earlier that integrity is huge. Reputation is everything that companies look for. And you want to have that curiosity and adaptability, because regulations change frequently either on a daily basis or on a quarterly basis. And you got to stay up to date with that. And one thing I want to emphasize is communication, which is a key aspect to being a regulatory affairs specialist, because you're communicating with scientists, with engineers, and management every single day. So you guys have to understand one another. And the amount of times I've seen in the industry where communication is not really there can lead to delays in products being released, getting hits with FDA. And these skills really come to reality once you join these companies. And I'll show you what that kind of looks like where I work now at Bio-Rad. Next slide.
Oh.
So at Bio-Rad, I currently work as an RA specialist. I'm more on the sustaining team. And we maintain compliance for products that are already out in the market. So we have different aspects of RA in my department where people are in the design control where the product is freshly made, and then whereas I deal with most of the products already in the market. And these type of products that we deal with are in vitro diagnostic products, also known as IVDs. And these are tools that are used in labs to test patient samples and ensure clinical, to ensure that we have accurate clinical results. And for example, one of the products that I've worked on was the liquid check immunology control. This helps clinical labs verify accuracy of their HIV and hepatitis testing system. And my day-to-day work pretty much covers everything from like making sure the labeling are correct, SDS updates, which is the safety data sheets, and making sure that our products meet global requirements under IVDR and also FDA. And other than working on that, I also do a little bit of, I am the subject matter expert in medical devices reporting and any DEA related activities. So I pretty much also monitor global standards to ensure that our quality systems stay aligned. So we have this thing called documents of external origin at our company where we have to make sure that our standards are up to date. If not, we can get a hit from one of our notified bodies, which we have this week from France. They're actually auditing our facility. They do it on a yearly basis. And they kind of like look at our process to see if there's any issues with any reportings or if there's like a gap in one of our processes. And all this really ties back to what Richard said about integrity and teamwork, because those kind of values is what keeps systems consistent and trustworthy across the organization. Next slide. Okay, so going back to what Richard said about, talked about how RA is really strategic, and that's exactly what I see every day at work. And we're not just, we're not at work just kind of checking boxes off. We're guiding the company through regulations so good products reach the patients a lot faster. And I mentioned here the 4 C's, but it looked like he had the 5 C's. The 5 C's that he mentioned really sums up what makes someone effective in this field. And the trust also extends outside of the company that you'll be working for. You also have like organizations like OCRA where you'll be able to learn more about. So what is OCRA? So OCRA is a local regulatory community. We host events, panels, and mentorship programs for students and professionals. They do offer a membership for students, which is $50 a year. And with that $50 a year, you have the perks of joining these conferences, coming to these events, and participating and becoming like a volunteer and really contributing to the organization. And also the most important thing is about networking, which I highly recommend. It's a great place to start your career as meeting new people in these industries and kind of determining where your path is. And to kind of end it right there. If you are interested, we can talk more about it after the presentation. I just wanted to throw that out. We do have a holiday mixer coming up on December 4th. I'll tell you more about it later on. And let's see, next slide. So here are some job openings that is worth looking at. And Bio-Rad is they're actually hiring for a temporary position, which I would kind of look into. You also have Medtronic there, posted about a position for a senior regulatory specialist, and Terumo also has an opening for a quality system engineer. So it doesn't technically have to be an RA position because RA works with all those bodies within that industry. So it can be an engineer, it can be a manufacturer, work in marketing. They all have ties to regulatory affairs some way. And that's pretty much it for my patient presentation. It's very short, not as much as information as Richard was explaining, but really want to keep it simple and concise. So I do want to thank Richard again and UCI for having me here. And I don't have to hold the slide up, but let me see if I can pull it up one more time.
Say, Besart, a question I have that if some of the folks in the room were to go to the holiday mixer, that would be a great opportunity, but how could they be assimilated in? I mean, is it possible that whoever's hosting that could, and let me just, I think I stopped sharing here, so let me get out of the screen, that could say that we have people here from the University of California, Irvine, who are potentially interested in a regulatory affairs career, just be on the lookout for them. How would the people in the room go there and make some of these contacts, which, I mean, this is a golden opportunity to meet people who are actually in the field and maybe make a relationship where they could get in touch, maybe connect on LinkedIn, and maybe even do a visit to one of their companies to say, what is it that you are doing that might be of interest to a person getting their degree?
Yeah, definitely. So with OCRA, we do have many events that occur on a regular basis, but because we're coming towards the end of the year, the holiday party or the holiday mixer, as they say, is the best way to have anyone that's interested in meeting the professionals that will be out there, which I highly recommend, kind of staying up to date, by visiting their website. And pretty much all the information is kind of laid out there, and which companies are involved, who our sponsors are, and kind of like connect with that group.
I think the folks at UC Irvine will know that Nancy Singer and I have given a course, and we did this course at UC Irvine, at USC, and also Chapman to grad students. And it's about techniques to meet people that could have a substantial and significant impact on your career. It's like going to a session like we're doing tonight. And it's also, maybe you have an interest, that individual, maybe it's a professor, maybe it's someone from a company is doing a poster session where you could go meet them and introduce yourself. It might be that they're giving a talk and at a conference you're going to, maybe you're going to a medical meeting, and they're on the program, so you try to connect with them by LinkedIn or maybe you're saying, I'm going to be there. I'm going to attend your talk. I have a question that I would really love you to answer, or maybe you could cover this. And then afterwards, you go up and introduce yourself. You say, is there a way that we could connect afterwards? Maybe you could give me the name of your administrative assistant, but it would be using these techniques, and something like the OCRA meeting is just a golden opportunity to meet people and to do an internship, maybe an opportunity like that. And, we talk about having a 1-minute elevator conversation where you talk about your name, what you're studying, what your career objectives are, where you believe you could be a good fit for that particular company. And it could be, or for a postdoc opportunity or an internship. So I think that is a key way to have a strategy of connecting with people, because these are the people that could make a difference in your career and introduce you to a career path that, like mine, totally exceeded my expectations on the twists and turns that it took from what I thought would be a job working as a chemical engineer in an area like pharmaceuticals or petrochemicals.
Right, absolutely agree. I mean, coming from the East Coast, originally I'm from the East Coast. I moved out to California 2 years ago. And when I heard about OCRA and I learned more about the organization, which is a nonprofit organization. And I connected with people at OCRA and realized how useful and how helpful it is. Just by learning what kind of companies represent OCRA and the professionals that are out there. And that's how I kind of landed one of my jobs here at Bar, just by connecting with someone from OCRA and having that connection and just kind of introducing yourself to them. So it is not just a typical organization. It's a really useful organization that I highly recommend looking into. And you don't have to become a member. You can also just, volunteer and then, join any of the events that are happening within the next couple of months. And it's fun. So really recommend it.
I have a quick question, actually. I was going to ask about the certification program that you said that you're a part of, and then I see some people have RAPS at the end of their name, or is there some sort of credentialing also that happens, and how useful is that credential or that certification program?
So the program that I'm taking here at UCI is just a certification program. I've seen other people who takes the RAPS certification program that will have an RAC next to your name after you complete the certification program. But the UCI is more of a continuing education program, so it's just more of a certificate program that you get.
Okay, so they're similar, or one is a credential kind of opportunity or something, or no?
So RAPS is more credential, where UCI is more of just regulatory program, just for continuing education.
You think it would kind of prepare you well for the
Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
Very interesting. Thank you.
No problem. Sorry, any questions? Any questions on the call?
I have a question kind of similar to what he was asking,
Yeah.
but for the different tiers of, I guess, like the upward mobility in your job, are there certain certifications that are required to get to certain levels, or is it like experience based, or does it depend on the company?
It's more experience based. I mean, I graduated with a bachelor's degree only, and I didn't have any other certification programs, because prior to my RA job, I used to work as a materials engineer and then as a scientist. And it's more experience based. But if you do have the credentials, it does add a big plus to your opportunity to get the role. But it's not highly recommended, only if you want to pursue more of a leadership position in the future. So
There's a person that I hired out of grad school, and we were competing. I had given a talk at USC. She was part of the regulatory science program and also getting a PhD in an area that was exactly what my company was doing. And we needed a person with her background. So she came out of school with a graduate degree. She had a master's in regulatory science, which was good because she could enter walking with respect to understanding what some of the regulations were and some of the FDA processes. And in school they had done exercises like doing a 510K, but nothing that she wouldn't have learned in the job with a mentor. And in fact, I asked her to come down to Irvine to our company and just see what we were doing in the same area of research as she was. And eventually, people thought she was excellent, and we hired her. I actually said, "Why don't you work a couple days a week in R&D, continue doing the kind of research, and then work in RA?" And then she eventually came full-time in RA. And she's had a spectacular rise in her career. The company was acquired by a large multinational company. She's only been out, I guess this was about 12 11 or 12 years ago that I hired her. And she's now a senior director with, she's obviously on a fast growth path. I remember on LinkedIn, I saw a post of her standing with the CEO. So here's the thing, you can come in ground floor with your education. And if you have the right mentor and you look for the right opportunities, yes, you'll be doing things like this regulatory affairs specialist job that Besart mentioned, a temporary job, but then you will advance. And you advance simply because you're recognized as being able to work hard, do good quality work, be a learner. And then, I look at this, another job that Besart had was senior RA specialist coordinator of advertising and promotion. Well, for that's sort of fun because you're working with a marketing group on how, well, it might not be fun all the time because they want more than maybe we can justify. But that requires now some knowledge of how advertising and promotion requirements and regulations pertain that you can't promote outside off label. But jobs like that, you don't have to come in necessarily with a knowledge of regulatory affairs. And that quality system engineer job at Terumo, quality engineers are vital on product development teams, and they're, considered gold. And sometimes they make the move from quality engineering into regulatory affairs. And I guess it could work the other way as well. But there are a lot of opportunities out there. And I think OCRA, through Besart, can learn of some of these and then just going on company websites.
I didn't catch that. Was that a question towards me or that was just a statement you were making?
How can someone, because I believe you guys are both engineers, if I'm not mistaken, or both went to school for some type of engineering. How can
Right.
someone outside of the engineering field kind of make themselves more interesting to someone that's hiring for regulatory?
Well, I can take that first, Besart. In my organization in regulatory, there weren't a lot of engineers. I mean, I think it's a great area, but if a person has a scientific background, even, a person, say, who's an English major comes in, they're great writers. They tend to be submission writers. And the scientists tend to be in any of these areas that we talked about, areas of regulatory affairs where one is playing inside the organization around that big wheel of opportunity of interaction. You would still, with say, a scientific background, an arts background, you would play to your strengths. If you could go on a product team as a scientist, much as Besart is with it, like a strong background in biologics, and be a very strong team player, you would probably try to look for an opportunity in a company that is, for example, making products that are more aligned with your background. For example, maybe you'd want to go into pharmaceuticals if you had a strong chemistry background. But if you're a mechanical engineer, maybe then that you'd want to go to a company that makes equipment. But it doesn't necessarily preclude it because regulatory affairs, a lot is learned on the job by diving into the product details on how it's designed, developed, manufactured, and then produced on large scale and sent out to the industry, to customers.
I have a question. How much of your work is like just sitting at the computer and writing documents?
Most of
Like,
it.
mostly?
Most of the day.
Okay.
Sometimes there are opportunities where we go into the manufacturing facility to see how the products are made from beginning to end. But it's not a rare occasion because most of our products, especially where I work, they're all already manufactured. There's just I deal most of the post-market surveillance of the products. So pretty much just kind of registering them, re-registering them in the regions and just updating any tech files to comply with the latest regulations. But most of the time, it is you're on the computer most of your day.
Have either of you worked on the clinical affairs side or have been around people on the clinical affairs side and seen that side of things? And is there a big difference in those two, regulatory affairs versus clinical affairs?
Great question. Me personally, I haven't worked on the clinical affairs side, so Richard, if you have that
I
experience.
have. I've managed clinical research departments, sometimes together with regulatory, sometimes just clinical, typically with regulatory. And the difference there is they have positions that are like often the group, sometimes that is led by a medical doctor. So sometimes in companies where I had regulatory and quality, there would be an MD who was running clinical. It depends on the level of the device and the criticality. But typically there are clinical research associates that audit facilities. They go in periodically and look at all the records. You'd be surprised how sometimes, sad to say, a doctor and his group will sometimes falsify clinical records, not necessarily put, like if there's an adverse event, not bury it, but they might tweak details about whether or not a patient came back for follow-up. So all of the details of a clinical study that might go for 2 or 3 years, and then with post-approval studies, there is the same kind of rigor. So a person who has a science background could play very well in the clinical research area and be working, going out to clinical sites, auditing, or maybe working in the department, harvesting all the clinical data coming in from a number of different clinical sites, and then helping to synthesize that into a clinical report that would pass muster with a regulatory group in its path on its way to a regulatory authority for approval. I hope that answers your question. Again, I just find science and engineering backgrounds are so, we're pretty well-rounded, so we tend to adapt quickly and we can understand a lot of the technical aspects of a product, including its how it interacts in the patient interface and with doctors in terms of ergonomics and the use of a machine, for example. I hope that answers the question about the comparison between clinical and regulatory. Sort of different areas, but equally interesting.
Any other questions? This will conclude today's presentation. So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Richard, again for your great presentation. Very useful.
Pleasure. Thanks.
For the introductions.
I wish I were there to hang around and talk to you. But people can reach out and connect with us if they have questions, comments. Thank you all. Thanks to the UCI staff for helping us put this all together. Besart, nice working with you as well. Have a good evening, everyone. I think we're a wrap. I'm going to leave the webcast.